Mary Jane adjusted the strap of her briefcase as she stepped into the hotel lobby, immediately spotting Prince Jesse across the polished floor. He wasn't waiting casually. He was reviewing documents on his tablet, standing with the kind of stillness that made the room feel smaller. Even without words, he commanded attention, as though the air around him bent to his will. "Hi family, I need you to please help subscribe and watch my video to the end. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Let us continue." Mary Jane's pulse ticked faster, not from fear but from recognition. She had worked under him for over 3 years. She knew his reputation, CEO, exacting, disciplined, untouchable in every boardroom he entered. She had seen colleagues falter under his scrutiny, watched him extract results without raising his voice. And yet, standing here in the hotel lobby, she was reminded of the subtle way he controlled everything around him, even the air she breathed. He looked up from the tablet and met her eyes. There was no warmth in the glance, only awareness, precision, and acknowledgement. Mary Jane offered a tight, professional nod, signaling that she was ready to work. He returned the gesture with the same economy, sliding his tablet into his briefcase with careful control, as if preparing for the negotiation that would define the next 2 days. They walked together to the reception desk, the lobby silent except for their measured footsteps. The clerk confirmed their booking and then, almost casually, mentioned that the hotel was fully booked due to a conference in the city. One last available suite was assigned to them, with a single large bed. Mary Jane's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She had anticipated logistical errors before. She had also anticipated challenges that required restraint. Rules existed for a reason, and her focus was on managing the situation professionally. Prince Jesse, noticing her pause, didn't comment. His eyes flicked toward the clerk and then back at her, a subtle signal that the expectation was clear. Handle this calmly, efficiently. Mary Jane exhaled and reminded herself that she was here to execute, not to react. The negotiation would require her full attention, and distractions, no matter how compelling, were unacceptable. The elevator ride to the floor was quiet, and in that silence, Mary Jane cataloged every detail. His posture, the tension in his shoulders, the slight way he shifted his weight as he checked his watch. It was not her place to feel distracted, and yet the awareness of his presence created a gravity she could not ignore. Prince Jesse had always been a man who demanded focus, and now, in the confined movement toward the suite, she realized focus would be harder than usual. The door opened to reveal the suite, minimalist, practical, one large bed, a small seating area. Everything about it was designed for work, efficiency, and clarity. Yet Mary Jane immediately recognized the unspoken challenge. They would share this space for the duration of the night. There was no escaping proximity, no convenient separation. Prince Jesse placed his briefcase on the desk, keeping movements precise and deliberate. He didn't offer her the bed, nor did he comment on the situation. That was him, silent authority, setting the expectation without words. Mary Jane felt a flicker of tension in her chest and settled it quickly. She reminded herself, professional boundaries first, strategy second, emotion not at all. She began arranging her laptop, reviewing notes, ensuring that every contingency for the negotiation was accounted for. Prince Jesse moved around the room with the same methodical care, checking the documents he would need, aligning schedules, making mental calculations. They were side by side, yet every step, every glance, every motion carried unspoken power dynamics. The air between them was taut. Neither spoke more than necessary. Mary Jane recognized this rhythm. They had worked together enough to anticipate each other's needs, to operate in sync without explicit communication. And yet, something in the knowledge that they were sharing this room because of an unavoidable mistake added a subtle edge to their professionalism. Hours passed with preparation and silent observation. Mary Jane reviewed figures, annotated risks, and projected scenarios. She was deeply focused, yet every so often she noted the small cues, the way Prince Jesse adjusted the angle of his tablet, the subtle tightening of his jaw as he reviewed a clause, the way he moved without wasting motion. He was the CEO, her superior, yet in this small, enclosed space, she was acutely aware of him in ways that went beyond professional obligation. Despite the tension, Mary Jane never faltered. Her role was to anticipate, support, and execute. She cataloged every detail, every movement, every nuance in Prince Jesse's behavior, not for curiosity, but for readiness. Boundaries existed for a reason, and she intended to respect them, even as proximity began to test them silently. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, indifferent to the contract-focused world inside the hotel suite. Inside, two professionals were bound together by circumstance, skill, and responsibility. Rules existed, and they had been trained to follow them. But the pressure of close quarters, the intensity of high stakes, and the awareness of each other's presence meant that even perfect discipline would face its first test tonight. Mary Jane closed her laptop and took a deep breath. The negotiation would demand precision, focus, and unwavering execution. But the night ahead, with its unexpected room-sharing complication, promised another kind of challenge, one that neither of them had anticipated, yet both already felt stirring beneath the surface. Contracts could be written, rules could be followed, discipline could be maintained, but proximity, attention, and the quiet pull of awareness could create tension that no protocol accounted for. And in that controlled, ordered space, Mary Jane knew, without speaking, without acknowledging, that the boundaries set by professionalism would soon be tested. The receptionist handed Mary Jane and Prince Jesse the single key card with a polite, apologetic smile. "I'm terribly sorry. The hotel is fully booked. This is the last available suite. It's one room, king bed." Mary Jane's hand tightened around her briefcase. She glanced at Prince Jesse, who already had his lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tense. No words passed immediately because words would not fix the situation. The weight of the room shared, unavoidable, settled over them like a challenge neither had asked for. Prince Jesse finally spoke, his voice low and precise, carrying authority even in a situation beyond his control. "We'll make this work, professionalism first." Mary Jane nodded, forcing a steadying breath. She reminded herself that this was still business, strategy, execution. The room, the bed, the close quarters, it was a logistical inconvenience, nothing more. Boundaries would remain intact. Discipline would prevail. The elevator ride to the suite was tense, every step measured, every glance calculated. Mary Jane noticed the small details she always did, the subtle angle of his shoulders, the slight flex of his fingers as he held the tablet, the way he carried himself with control even when faced with the unexpected. She cataloged everything, internalizing every sign, every nuance. The suite door opened and they stepped inside together. One large bed dominated the room, while a small seating area hugged the far wall. Minimalist design, practical furnishings, everything functional and professional. But the proximity it demanded was immediate and inescapable. Prince Jesse placed his briefcase on the desk, straightening the papers inside as he moved. Without turning to her, he said, "You take the bed, I'll use the couch." The words were calm, factual, precise. No anger, no hesitation, just expectation. Mary Jane exhaled, her body unconsciously reacting to the firmness in his tone. It was not a command meant to intimidate. It was a line drawn, a rule stated clearly. She respected it immediately. "Understood," she replied, steady, neutral. Professionalism was non-negotiable. They unpacked silently. Every movement was intentional. Mary Jane arranged her laptop and documents on the desk nearest the bed, while Prince Jesse reviewed his notes on the sitting area table. They moved around the room with careful awareness, careful not to intrude, yet conscious of the other's presence in a way that heightened every gesture, every step. The evening stretched and still, no words beyond what necessity required. Yet the tension in the room grew, subtle but palpable. They were two highly competent professionals forced into proximity, both aware of the implications, both meticulously keeping their focus on the business at hand. Mary Jane reviewed timelines, margins, and contingencies for the negotiation, occasionally glancing at Prince Jesse as he annotated contracts and double-checked schedules. He worked with efficiency, discipline, and precision. She admired that professionally, but the awareness of him so close, so unavoidably present, stirred a tension she cataloged carefully, controlled carefully. They ate dinner in silence, each maintaining poise and protocol. The room allowed for no distractions, no casual spaces where familiarity could creep in unnoticed. And yet, each movement, each glance, each brief interaction carried weight beyond the words exchanged. Boundaries had been stated, rules had been set, but the shared space was already testing them. Prince Jesse reviewed the negotiation agenda again, adjusting figures and outcomes with methodical care. Mary Jane observed quietly, not just following the protocol of preparation but nodding his approach, the way he anticipated every variable, the way he operated with control that was almost magnetic. She respected it, even as awareness of him lingered. Hours passed. Work dominated, yet the room's closeness remained undeniable. Every action was deliberate, measured, professional, but tension existed in the quiet spaces, in the small shifts of posture, in the fleeting moments of shared awareness. They navigated it without breach, each acknowledging rules, boundaries, and authority. Mary Jane finally closed her laptop, acknowledging a break in preparation. Prince Jesse had already placed his tablet aside, reviewing notes silently, his focus unbroken. They shared the room with the understanding that rules were not just expected, they were required. And in that understanding, something subtle stirred. It was not spoken. It was not acted upon. It was the acknowledgement that even in the most professional circumstances, proximity could create a pressure the rules alone might not fully contain. Mary Jane settled onto the bed, carefully keeping a distance from the center, her posture straight, her mind anchored to preparation. Prince Jesse reclined slightly on the couch, attention fixed on the final review of the negotiation points. No words were exchanged about the room, the bed, or the situation they were in. The professional barrier remained, clearly defined. Yet the night carried a quiet intensity neither could ignore. Shared space forced awareness. Awareness amplified tension. Discipline maintained the boundary. But in the silence, every glance, every movement, every controlled breath added weight to a dynamic neither had chosen, yet both recognized. They were here for work, yet the space demanded more than execution. The contract world, precise and ordered, now carried a variable neither could control fully: each other. And as the lights dimmed, leaving only the city glow filtering through the windows, Mary Jane realized something that was both dangerous and undeniable. Professional boundaries could be stated, but the human element, the awareness, the proximity, the unspoken gravity, was impossible to regulate completely. The rules had been spoken, lines had been drawn, but even in professionalism, the room had already begun to test them. The first hours of night had passed quietly, yet Mary Jane was acutely aware of every small sound Prince Jesse made. The faint rustle of papers as he double-checked the negotiation figures, the subtle click of his pen on the table, the soft sigh as he leaned back for a brief stretch. All of it registered in her mind as if magnified by the close quarters. She had prepared herself for a shared room as a logistical inconvenience. She had not prepared for how it would sharpen her awareness, heighten every sense. Her movements became deliberate, calculated not only for efficiency, but for the small, unspoken boundaries they both now navigated. Prince Jesse moved with the same precision he always did. He arranged his notes meticulously, aligned the documents, and even his stretches were controlled, measured, as though any excess motion would disrupt the balance of the room. Mary Jane observed without starring, cataloging each gesture, each habit as she carried out her own tasks. She kept her side of the room organized, her laptop angled precisely, her notes arranged in a logical sequence. Everything she did was functional, purposeful, professional. Yet in every carefully measured movement, proximity forced awareness. She noted how he exhaled slowly, how he paused before reaching for a page, how the shadow of his hand crossed the light of the lamp. It was not desire. It was acknowledgement, a recognition that two people confined together, both competent, both disciplined, would inevitably notice each other beyond casual observation. Hours stretched and still neither spoke beyond the necessary. The silence was heavy with unspoken rules. Both understood the boundaries. Both knew the consequences of overstepping them. But the tension was now organic, subtle, and unavoidable. Mary Jane leaned over her laptop, reviewing figures for the negotiation. She could feel the weight of Prince Jesse's gaze without him having to look. There was a gravity in the space they shared, an invisible pressure that made her pulse slightly quicker, made her hands slightly more aware of every motion. She reminded herself, rules first, observation second, emotion not at all. Prince Jesse adjusted a stack of papers, his movements smooth and efficient, yet Mary Jane caught the small detail of how his sleeve brushed against the edge of the desk. A minor motion, inconsequential, and yet in the quiet of the suite, it registered more sharply than it should. She realized that the closeness of the room magnified everything. Every gesture, every breath, every glance carried weight. Despite the silent awareness, both maintained their routines with perfection. Prince Jesse's focus on the negotiation was unwavering. Mary Jane's attention to every contingency remained precise. They were professionals, trained to handle pressure, to anticipate errors, to deliver results without distraction. And yet, the proximity introduced variables that no protocol had prepared them for. Mary Jane noticed the subtle ways he occupied the space, the way he positioned himself at the edge of the table, the way his body created a boundary she instinctively respected, the way his presence seemed to shape the light and energy of the room. She cataloged it without judgment, purely observation, understanding that in this moment, their professional identities were intertwined with the physical reality of the suite. Time passed in measured increments. Mary Jane carried out tasks she had already memorized. Prince Jesse refined projections and reviewed schedules, his efficiency perfect, exacting. And yet, the room seemed to shrink with awareness as though each moment of shared space amplified the gravity between them. There was a rhythm developing, silent, careful, professional, yet charged. The room carried the sound of preparation, the soft tapping of keyboards, the rustle of paper, the occasional muted sigh. Silence became a language of its own. Every action communicated intention, every pause communicated awareness, every careful step reinforced boundaries. Neither could ignore the subtle tension, nor could either allow it to interfere with the work at hand. Mary Jane shifted slightly, stretching her back, careful not to intrude, careful not to appear distracted. Prince Jesse continued his meticulous work across the small distance, unaware or unconcerned with her movements. Yet in the quiet, she felt his presence as sharply as if he had been standing beside her. Awareness had become a shared variable, an unspoken dynamic neither could control, yet both had to navigate. The night deepened. The city outside glimmered through the window, indifferent to the contained intensity within. Inside, two professionals occupied the same room, bound by circumstance, responsibility, and shared purpose. Their routines intersected without collision, their boundaries maintained without compromise. Yet the proximity created a tension that rules alone could not govern. Mary Jane exhaled slowly, settling into the rhythm of work and quiet observation. She reminded herself repeatedly that discipline was her ally, that focus was her shield, and that the next 48 hours would demand precision above all. Still, awareness lingered, subtle, persistent, undeniable. By the time she closed her laptop for a short break, she realized that the room, the shared space, the proximity and the silent gravity between them had already begun to test boundaries in ways neither had anticipated. Professionalism would hold for now. Discipline would govern action. But awareness had become a force in its own right, shaping their movements, their attention, and the energy that filled the suite. Mary Jane shifted on the bed slightly, careful to maintain distance, and allowed herself a brief acknowledgement. The night would be longer, more complicated, and far more charged than any protocol could predict. And yet, both of them continued in perfect professional synchrony, aware that the rules had been stated, boundaries drawn, and discipline maintained. But that even within those limits, tension had its own agenda. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the curtains, casting the hotel suite in soft, muted tones. Mary Jane was already awake, seated on the edge of the bed, reviewing her notes on the negotiation one last time. The city beyond the window moved as though unaware of the tension in this one room, where two highly disciplined professionals were navigating both work and proximity. Prince Jesse stirred, shifting papers on the small table across from her. His presence, calm and controlled, felt heavier in the quiet of early morning. The stillness allowed awareness to expand beyond tasks, into patterns, habits, and subtle glimpses of personality. For the first time, Mary Jane noticed the way he read, not just numbers, not just schedules, but patterns of behavior, strategies that extended beyond the corporate sphere. He glanced at her briefly, not interrupting, not demanding acknowledgement, simply observing. There was no warmth in the look, but it carried curiosity, controlled, deliberate, and carefully restrained. Mary Jane felt a ripple of something unspoken, awareness meeting awareness, intellect meeting intellect. For all his authority, there was a measure of calculation she had not appreciated before, a clarity that fascinated her in a way she did not allow herself to label. Breaking the silence, she shifted slightly and said, "I noticed some of the projections from last quarter don't align with what the board expects. We may need to adjust our approach." Prince Jesse nodded, his gaze lifting from the notes. "I've accounted for discrepancies. Contingencies are in place, but your assessment is valuable. You see nuances I sometimes overlook." The statement was professional, yet in its simplicity, it carried acknowledgement, and Mary Jane felt a quiet recognition that her input mattered beyond routine execution. She kept her expression neutral, though internally she registered the subtle weight of his words. This was not praise designed for comfort. It was acknowledgement grounded in analysis, in competence, in the understanding that intellect and precision were respected, even by a man who rarely gave recognition. The morning moved in layers of observation and subtle interaction. They discussed points of negotiation, strategies, contingencies, and potential outcomes. Each conversation was efficient, professional, yet carried undertones of personal alignment. They discovered small commonalities, approaches to problem-solving, attention to detail, and standards of excellence that were never previously verbalized. In those shared moments, the tension of the room shifted, subtly deepening from mere proximity into mutual recognition. Mary Jane observed patterns in Prince Jesse's reasoning, the same meticulous logic she had admired from a distance. And in turn, he noted her clarity, the way she synthesized information, anticipated challenges, and proposed solutions without hesitation or need for validation. The room became a quiet space for intellectual synergy, where attraction did not require words or action, only the acknowledgement of competence and awareness. Time moved differently in the morning light. Professional tasks overlapped with subtle awareness. Mary Jane noticed the small details, the way he exhaled when reviewing figures, the micro-adjustments in posture as he processed information, the way his presence seemed to draw a focused rhythm from the room itself. She cataloged everything, understanding that attraction could be as much a product of intellect and attention as of physical proximity. Prince Jesse, too, recognized the shift, though he did not articulate it. In Mary Jane, he saw not just a competent analyst but a mind aligned with his own, capable of anticipating moves, interpreting nuance, and holding the focus he required in high-pressure situations. The unspoken acknowledgement created tension, professional, intellectual, and quietly personal. The discussion turned toward the negotiation's potential pitfalls. Each point raised by Mary Jane was met with analysis, consideration, and occasionally subtle challenge from Prince Jesse. He pushed her thinking, she refined it in response, and the room became a structured exchange of intellect. In this mutual recognition, attraction found a different form, not desire, not longing, but respect interwoven with awareness. Even in silence, the suite felt charged. Their presence, their focus, their mutual understanding created a rhythm that neither could ignore. It was professional. It was controlled. And yet, it carried weight beyond the negotiation, a quiet acknowledgement that rules, discipline, and boundaries were being tested in ways neither fully anticipated. By midday, they had aligned their strategies, prepared contingencies, and reviewed potential outcomes exhaustively. Yet Mary Jane felt a lingering tension, a quiet force in the room shaped not by proximity alone, but by the recognition of mutual intellect and discipline. Rules remained intact. Boundaries were respected. Professionalism prevailed. But awareness had shifted, and both understood that it would continue to grow, quietly, unspoken, inevitable. Mary Jane allowed herself a controlled exhale. The room, the morning, the shared awareness, all of it had shifted the dynamic. They were no longer simply superior and analysts sharing a hotel suite. They were two minds in parallel, each measuring, assessing, and quietly responding to the other. Attraction had become subtle, intellectual, and professional, a force neither could act on but both could not ignore. Prince Jesse looked at her once, brief, analytical, and returned to his notes. Mary Jane returned to hers, understanding that in this quiet psychological shift, the room had expanded to include awareness, tension, and unspoken alignment. Professionalism still ruled, but the rules of engagement were evolving in subtle ways that neither could yet name, only acknowledge. And as the sun climbed higher, filling the room with light, both knew one unspoken truth. The next hours would test discipline, boundaries, and the quiet magnetism that neither dared to define, but both were fully aware of. The morning light had shifted into afternoon, brushing the suite in a warm, filtered glow. Mary Jane had just finalized the last of her contingency notes when Prince Jesse's voice cut through the quiet, calm but unmistakably firm. "I've reviewed the team assignments for the negotiation," he said, eyes scanning her notes before lifting them to meet hers. "I'm adjusting the presentation sequence. You'll lead the opening, but the follow-ups will be handled by others. I want to minimize risk." Mary Jane's pulse tightened slightly. She understood the reasoning. Prince Jesse was meticulous, always thinking several steps ahead, but the decision carried weight. By redistributing the follow-ups, he had limited her exposure and influence in the negotiation. It was not punishment. It was not malicious. But it was a professional setback, subtle yet undeniable. She looked up at him, steadying herself. "Understood," she said. Her tone was neutral, controlled, though internally she cataloged the consequences. The choice he had made would protect the negotiation's integrity, but it also constrained her capacity to showcase her expertise fully. Her mind raced through scenarios, adjustments, contingencies, and ways to regain influence without overstepping boundaries. Prince Jesse observed her reaction, nodding her measured acknowledgement. He knew she was capable, competent, and fiercely intelligent. Yet he also knew the stakes. This was not about authority for its own sake. It was about minimizing professional risk. Still, he could see, as clearly as she could feel, the subtle tension forming, the friction of duty against ambition, strategy against personal desire for recognition. Mary Jane returned to her notes, carefully recalculating the timelines, refining her speaking points, anticipating potential questions. She understood the rationale behind Prince Jesse's decision. She respected it. And yet, the shift in control created a pressure in the room that was impossible to ignore. In the quiet space of the suite, proximity made awareness sharper. Every gesture, every movement, every glance carried weight. Prince Jesse, meanwhile, continued preparing his own sections. He did not comment on the tension, did not attempt to soften it. That was not his method. Authority for him was exercised with precision and restraint, never indulgence. He understood that boundaries existed for a reason. And part of professionalism was maintaining them, even when the other party recognized the impact of a decision. Mary Jane adjusted her chair, careful not to intrude on the small area he occupied at the desk. She worked silently, methodically, every movement intentional. The proximity of the room amplified everything, her awareness of him, the way he occupied space, the quiet gravity that seemed to follow his focus. The decision he had made was purely professional, yet the effect was personal, subtle, a tension that both recognized without nomming. As she reviewed her notes again, Mary Jane realized the challenge was not just the decision itself, but the awareness it created between them. Prince Jesse's authority was absolute in professional matters, yet in this small, shared space, she felt the full weight of it in ways that were not entirely about work. Every adjustment he made, every choice he enacted, subtly reshaped the dynamic of their proximity, the rhythm of the room, and the unspoken awareness between them. She exhaled slowly, maintaining her composure, but the tension lingered. Prince Jesse glanced up, meeting her gaze briefly. There was no malice, no critique, only acknowledgement. He had made a calculated choice, and she had processed it with professionalism. Yet both understood that influence, attention, and awareness were factors that extended beyond spoken words or formal authority. Mary Jane returned to her preparation, refining her opening speech, anticipating questions, and rehearsing her timing. She was determined to execute flawlessly. Prince Jesse, observing her dedication, recognized the subtle friction his decision had caused. He did not intervene. This was part of leadership, understanding the impact of authority, anticipating responses, and maintaining focus without unnecessary interference. Time passed in measured, deliberate work. The negotiation was approaching, and both were preparing meticulously. Mary Jane felt the lingering pressure of Prince Jesse's authority, not overbearing, not hostile, but undeniably present. She cataloged every subtle cue, the way he adjusted his notes, the micro-expressions of focus, the small, controlled gestures that underscored his command of the situation. The room seemed charged with unspoken acknowledgement. Authority had been exercised. Professional boundaries had been maintained. And yet, the subtle tension of awareness, proximity, and the unspoken interplay of power created an emotional weight neither could ignore. Mary Jane paused for a moment, stretching slightly while keeping distance from the center of the bed. Her mind cataloged the lessons of the day, the importance of precision, the effect of authority, the subtle interplay of tension that proximity creates. She understood the challenge fully. Influence and control existed on multiple levels, and navigating them required discipline, awareness, and measured responses. Prince Jesse, reviewing the final contingencies, exhaled softly. His authority had been exercised with purpose, yet he, too, felt the subtle shift in the room. Boundaries remained intact, professionalism prevailed, but awareness, silent, persistent, undeniable, was shaping the dynamic between them. By the late afternoon, the shared suite had become a quiet arena of tension and anticipation. Rules had been stated, authority had been asserted, boundaries maintained. But in the interplay of decision, proximity, and awareness, both understood that the psychological weight of the day had subtly altered the room. Professionalism was intact, but the magnetic pull of intellect, control, and shared purpose had introduced a quiet, persistent undercurrent that neither could fully manage or ignore. Mary Jane leaned back slightly, closing her eyes for a brief moment, acknowledging the challenge of authority, the weight of proximity, and the subtle power of awareness. She had faced tests before, but never one so intricate, so precise, so quietly transformative. And Prince Jesse, sitting across the room, understood the unspoken truth as clearly as she did. Leadership, influence, and discipline could be exercised, but awareness, the human element, always found a way to exert its quiet force. Night fell with a muted hush over the city, casting long shadows across the hotel suite. The lights from the streets below filtered through the curtains, faint and steady, giving the room an almost intimate glow. Mary Jane sat on the edge of the bed, laptop closed, papers stacked neatly to the side. The day's preparation had ended, yet the air in the room felt heavier than it had all morning. The weight was not the work, it was the awareness between them. Prince Jesse leaned against the desk, reviewing his notes one last time. The glow of the tablet reflected in his eyes, sharp, precise, and controlled. For hours, he had held every measure of authority, yet now, in the quiet of the night, there was a subtle shift, an unspoken recognition that the professional barrier could not contain every nuance of awareness. Mary Jane's fingers twitched slightly, brushing against the edge of the bed as she collected herself. She understood that the tension in the room was no longer only about schedules, contingencies, or professional hierarchy. It had grown into something broader: awareness, observation, restraint, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared presence. She cataloged it without judgment, noting how proximity, intellect, and unspoken connection were exerting a force neither of them could fully regulate. Prince Jesse straightened, crossing the small distance toward the bed without stepping into her space. His movements were controlled, deliberate, measured. He did not speak immediately. The silence was dense, heavy with anticipation and unspoken acknowledgement. For the first time since the shared suite, the dynamic between them felt palpable in a way that was not solely professional. Finally, he said, "Mary Jane, I've noticed how you handle pressure. How you anticipate outcomes, manage contingencies, and maintain focus even when the environment is complicated." His words were precise, restrained, carrying weight beyond casual professional observation. Mary Jane looked at him, holding his gaze with careful composure. She understood the acknowledgement beneath the professionalism. "I learned from experience," she replied calmly, though inside, her awareness of him throbbed subtly with a force she had not expected. "And I notice you handle it with control, even when circumstances aren't ideal." Their words were few, but each carried a layered understanding. Professional respect intertwined with personal recognition, intellect intertwining with subtle emotional awareness. The room felt smaller, more concentrated with their shared energy, yet neither moved impulsively. They both understood that restraint did not diminish tension, it intensified it. Prince Jesse shifted slightly, settling into the chair near the desk. "This room, this situation," he began, voice measured, "forces awareness. It highlights boundaries, authority, and vulnerabilities we rarely allow ourselves to examine in a professional context." Mary Jane absorbed the weight of his words. She realized that what he meant was not personal desire. It was the recognition that shared space, professional dependence, and the unavoidable proximity of their roles had created a pressure that demanded honesty, clarity, and careful management. "I agree," she said softly. "Awareness is unavoidable here. It challenges discipline and tests boundaries even when both parties intend otherwise." There was no pause for sentimentality, no attempt to soften the truth. Both acknowledged it with clarity, professionalism, and subtle honesty. The tension in the room was no longer simply external, it had shifted inward, becoming a quiet force that demanded acknowledgement. Hours passed in quiet observation. Each glance, each movement, each subtle shift in posture carried weight. Mary Jane noted the way Prince Jesse's eyes softened slightly when he assessed a document, the way his presence seemed to shape the room's energy. He observed her meticulous organization, her careful attention to detail, and the quiet intensity with which she maintained boundaries despite the pressure of shared proximity. Neither spoke further, yet the room felt saturated with emotional truth. Power, awareness, and restraint intertwined, creating a tension that was no longer merely professional. Both recognized the undercurrent, cataloged it, and respected it, knowing that acting impulsively could compromise discipline, boundaries, and integrity. Mary Jane leaned back on the bed slightly, her body relaxed yet attentive. She understood that the night had transformed the dynamic between them. It was no longer only a room shared for convenience. It was a crucible of awareness, discipline, and subtle emotional honesty. Prince Jesse, across the suite, mirrored the same recognition. Authority had been exercised, professionalism maintained, and yet the psychological pressure of proximity had achieved a quiet, undeniable resonance. As midnight approached, both paused, taking in the gravity of the shared silence. Rules remained intact, boundaries respected, yet emotional honesty had emerged in subtle, irreversible ways. Awareness, proximity, and mutual observation had shifted the dynamic permanently, laying the groundwork for what neither could yet name but both could not deny. Mary Jane exhaled, her mind cataloging lessons from the night. The effect of authority on perception, the weight of restraint in shared proximity, and the quiet intensity that arose when intellect and awareness intersected. Prince Jesse returned to his notes briefly, and though neither crossed a line, both understood that the emotional honesty of this night had changed the rules of engagement between them. In the quiet of the suite, with the city lights filtering through the curtains, both realized the same truth. Professional boundaries had been maintained, yet emotional awareness had been irrevocably altered. Discipline, focus, and authority still ruled, but the night had proven one certainty: restraint does not erase tension, and awareness does not respect rules. And with that understanding, both returned to their work silently, minds sharpened, attention refined, and an unspoken acknowledgement lingering between them. A quiet, controlled, and profound reckoning that neither could reverse. Morning arrived with soft light spilling across the suite, painting the walls in muted gold. Mary Jane stirred first, careful not to disturb the precision of the room that had become a silent arena of tension and awareness. The night had been quiet, disciplined, but its echoes lingered, subtle and undeniable. Every movement, every glance, every unspoken acknowledgement of shared presence had left a mark on the room, and on them. She rose slowly, her body tense with awareness, and arranged her notes neatly, as if the order could contain the weight of unspoken truths. The city outside was waking, indifferent to the subtle upheaval within the suite. Mary Jane felt the gravity of what had passed. The night had been a crucible of restraint, awareness, and emotional honesty. Boundaries had been tested, yet discipline had prevailed. Prince Jesse was already awake, seated at the desk with the morning light falling across his features. His posture was precise, controlled, yet she noted the subtle relaxation in his shoulders, a quiet acknowledgement of the shift in the room's energy. He glanced at her briefly, eyes meeting hers, and in that simple motion, the room seemed to thrum with the residue of last night's intensity. Mary Jane approached the desk, careful to maintain professional distance, yet unable to ignore the awareness that charged the space between them. She set her laptop down, aligned her notes, and observed him quietly. The professional barrier remained, but the psychological and emotional shift was clear to both. Prince Jesse spoke first, his voice calm, measured, carrying the weight of authority softened by awareness. Mary Jane, last night was significant, not in ways I expected, but the result is clear. We operate differently now, not in discipline, but in awareness. Mary Jane nodded, her response steady, yet her mind cataloged the implications. I felt it too. Boundaries remain, rules remain, but something has shifted. Awareness, focus, everything feels sharper, more deliberate. They shared a moment of silence, neither needing to elaborate further. The acknowledgement was enough. The room had changed, not physically, but in the subtle currents of interaction, attention, and restraint. Last night had revealed the depth of their connection through intellect, observation, and emotional honesty. Mary Jane moved to the window briefly, adjusting the curtains to let in more light. The city below was vibrant and unaware, yet within the suite, clarity had settled. Their professional dynamic, once defined solely by hierarchy and authority, had been tested and refined. Awareness now existed as a constant, shaping every thought, every movement, every interaction. Prince Jesse returned to reviewing notes, his attention sharp yet thoughtful. He did not speak again immediately, understanding that actions and presence often carried more weight than words in defining the morning after a night of shared tension. Mary Jane, meanwhile, prepared for the day's schedule, organizing her materials with precision, mindful of the subtle gravitational pull that had developed between them. As she adjusted her briefcase, she paused, nodding the way Prince Jesse observed her, not critically, not intrusively, but with measured attention. The awareness was mutual, professional, yet undeniable. It was not desire, not intrusion, but acknowledgement, a recognition of the psychological shift, the quiet understanding that the night had changed something fundamental about their interaction. The air between them was charged, yet disciplined. Neither crossed boundaries, neither faltered in professionalism, yet both understood that the balance had shifted. Mary Jane felt the subtle empowerment of awareness, the realization that emotional honesty could coexist with discipline, that proximity and restraint had forged a new dynamic. Prince Jesse finally broke the silence again, voice firm yet tempered. "Today, we proceed as planned, but understand this. What happened last night cannot be ignored. It informs every decision, every observation, every action. Awareness now guides execution, not just protocol." Mary Jane met his gaze, steady and composed. "I understand, and I'll ensure it shapes focus, not distraction. Discipline first, awareness second, execution always." Her words were precise, carrying the weight of understanding and acknowledgement. The morning passed with meticulous preparation, each task executed with heightened clarity. The suite, once merely a workspace, had become a crucible where professional boundaries, emotional awareness, and subtle attraction intertwined. Every glance, every shift, every measure of attention reinforced the lessons of the night. Restraint, honesty, and mutual recognition were now intertwined with their professional dynamic. By the time they were ready to leave for the negotiation, the tension remained, controlled, deliberate, refined. Rules had not been broken, authority had not been challenged, yet clarity had emerged. Both Mary Jane and Prince Jesse understood that the night had changed the terms of engagement. Awareness would now guide their interactions as much as professionalism. As they exited the suite, side by side but maintaining space, Mary Jane carried the quiet acknowledgement of last night's shift. The hotel room, the shared space, and the subtle tension had proven one truth. Boundaries could be maintained, discipline could govern action, but awareness, emotional, intellectual, and subtle, would always shape the dynamic between them. And in that understanding, both left the suite prepared, focused, and acutely aware of what had changed, and what could not revert to its previous state. The office on Monday morning had a different energy than usual. Mary Jane stepped in, briefcase in hand, fully aware of the shift that had settled between her and Prince Jesse. It was not tension born of conflict, nor was it awkwardness. It was the quiet awareness that had grown over the shared night, the morning of clarity, and the subtle recognition that proximity had transformed their dynamic. Prince Jesse was already at his desk when she arrived, reviewing reports with his usual precision. His presence was commanding, but he allowed space now in a way that was intentional. The subtle magnetism of last night had been acknowledged, understood, and reframed into a professional context. Mary Jane approached with a measured stride, keeping her attention on the tasks at hand. Their eyes met briefly, and there was a silent understanding. The proximity that had shaped awareness in the hotel suite would no longer dominate interactions. Distance, in both physical and professional terms, was a tool, a deliberate structure to preserve focus, clarity, and mutual respect. The first meeting of the day was a team briefing. Mary Jane led the session with confidence, outlining the strategy for the negotiation. Prince Jesse listened, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions or clarifications. Each exchange was precise, intentional, and measured. Boundaries were being reinforced, and yet awareness of each other remained, a quiet undercurrent guiding every interaction. After the briefing, Prince Jesse requested a private discussion. Mary Jane followed him into the adjacent office, her posture professional, her expression controlled. The room was quiet, and the weight of unspoken acknowledgement lingered in the air. "I've been thinking," Prince Jesse began, voice steady and deliberate, "about the week ahead, the negotiation, and the events in the hotel suite. I believe we need a strategic separation." Mary Jane raised an eyebrow, curiosity and understanding mingling. "Separation in terms of space or roles?" "Both," he said. "We need clarity, focus, and boundaries. For the next few days, you'll handle client interactions directly while I oversee strategy from a separate location. It's not avoidance, it's structure. We maintain professionalism and focus without allowing proximity to influence judgment or actions." Mary Jane nodded, processing the rationale. It was logical, disciplined, and deliberate. The choice was not emotional, it was strategic, calculated to preserve both effectiveness and awareness. Yet in its execution, it acknowledged the subtle tension that had grown between them, a tension that was neither inappropriate nor to be indulged, but that required containment. "Understood," she said. "It makes sense. Focus and clarity first. Awareness second, controlled. Execution always." Her words echoed the disciplined mindset that had guided her through the hotel suite, the night, and the morning after. Prince Jesse regarded her briefly, a subtle acknowledgement in his expression. "Exactly. We can operate effectively without compromising either professionalism or the quality of work. Distance is not avoidance, it's strategy." The days that followed were a carefully orchestrated dance. Mary Jane handled meetings, presentations, and client interactions with precision, while Prince Jesse oversaw outcomes from his office, making high-level decisions and monitoring the strategy. Physical proximity was reduced, yet awareness remained. Every email, every report, every brief exchange was layered with the knowledge of their shared experience. The night of reckoning, the morning of clarity, and the subtle, controlled acknowledgement of tension. In private moments, Mary Jane noted the micro-adjustments in Prince Jesse's behavior. He respected space without disengaging. His instructions were clear, his oversight intentional, and his attention sharp but unobtrusive. She mirrored the same behavior, maintaining focus, executing tasks flawlessly, and acknowledging the strategic boundaries they had agreed upon. This deliberate separation allowed both of them to recalibrate. Proximity no longer dictated awareness. Discipline now guided interaction. Yet the emotional undercurrent persisted, refined into something quieter, more controlled, and more professional. They were aware of each other in ways that were no longer threatening to their roles, yet still undeniable, a mutual understanding of restraint, focus, and recognition. By midweek, the strategic separation had proven effective. Tasks were executed with precision, decisions were made efficiently, and the subtle tension that had once dominated the shared suite was now a controlled, acknowledged presence. It had become part of their dynamic, a force that informed attention, guided behavior, and reinforced the professionalism that both valued. Mary Jane reflected on the week's progress, realizing that distance had not diminished awareness. It had refined it. Proximity had created tension, but structure had transformed it into clarity. She recognized the quiet power of boundaries, the necessity of discipline, and the subtle resonance of acknowledgement in shaping professional dynamics without compromising emotional integrity. Prince Jesse, observing outcomes from his office, noted the effectiveness of the separation. Awareness had been preserved, focus sharpened, and emotional honesty contained without disruption. The strategic separation was not a retreat. It was a controlled advance, an acknowledgement of shared presence, and a reinforcement of professional integrity. By Friday afternoon, both understood the same truth. Distance could be deliberate, awareness could be refined, and tension could exist without intrusion. The strategic separation had not diminished connection. It had elevated clarity, professionalism, and subtle mutual acknowledgement. They had not avoided what had arisen. They had mastered it. Mary Jane closed her laptop, exhaled, and allowed herself a brief moment of recognition. The week had tested boundaries, discipline, and awareness. It had required restraint, focus, and deliberate action. And in that structured separation, both she and Prince Jesse had maintained professionalism while acknowledging the undercurrent that would continue to define their dynamic, controlled, deliberate, and unmistakably present. Monday morning arrived, crisp and precise, and the office felt different. Mary Jane stepped in with confidence, her briefcase in hand, prepared not just for tasks but for the subtle shift that was about to occur. The strategic separation of the previous week had worked, focus had sharpened, awareness had been refined, but now it was time for balance. Prince Jesse rose from his desk as she approached, the subtle acknowledgement in his eyes unmistakable. Today, the hierarchy would adjust, not drastically, not abruptly, but enough to signal that influence, authority, and professional power were no longer one-sided. "I've reviewed the negotiation outcomes from last week," he said, voice measured, calm, yet carrying an unspoken weight. "Your execution has been precise and your judgment reliable. For the next phase, I want you to make key decisions directly. I'll act as support, not oversight." Mary Jane paused, nodding the deliberate nature of his words. This was not delegation for convenience. It was a conscious relinquishing of authority, a gesture designed to level their professional dynamic. It carried the subtle power of acknowledgement, competence recognized, judgment trusted, and responsibility shared. She nodded, carefully choosing her words. "Understood. I'll ensure decisions are informed, precise, and aligned with strategy. Your guidance will remain, but execution will be mine." Her tone was professional, firm, but internally, she recognized the gravity of the gesture. This was more than operational, it was symbolic, a subtle shift in the power dynamic that reinforced equality and trust. Prince Jesse observed her closely, noting the composure, focus, and readiness in her stance. He understood that true authority was not about maintaining control, it was about creating space for competence to thrive. By stepping back, he demonstrated respect, trust, and an acknowledgement of shared professional strength. The day unfolded with a new rhythm. Mary Jane led client calls, executed strategic decisions, and coordinated team efforts, while Prince Jesse contributed insight without imposing dominance. Every instruction, every suggestion, every brief interaction reinforced the balance they were establishing. Authority existed, but it was shared, nuanced, and informed by mutual respect rather than hierarchy alone. Mary Jane felt the subtle energy of this shift. The tension that had once been charged by proximity and authority now transformed into a focused, collaborative force. Awareness remained, but it was guided by balance and equality rather than dominance. Every glance, every microadjustment in posture, every silent acknowledgement carried the weight of this new equilibrium. Prince Jesse, meanwhile, recognized the impact of the adjustment. By allowing Mary Jane to exercise judgment, he observed her strength, decision-making, and adaptability in real time. His own presence, restrained and supportive, reinforced the equality without diminishing his role as CEO. The room, the office, and the tasks themselves became a subtle exercise in shared power, awareness, and professional synergy. They worked side by side without physical proximity demanding attention. The space between them was functional, yet charged with the quiet acknowledgement of mutual competence. Each task, report, and strategic decision carried weight not because of hierarchy, but because both understood the stakes, responsibilities, and subtle influence of awareness. At one point, a challenging client query arose and Mary Jane handled it decisively. Prince Jesse observed silently, resisting the instinct to intervene. Her response was precise, measured, and effective. In that moment, the professional equilibrium became undeniable, competence recognized, authority shared, and trust solidified without need for words. Later, in a brief pause, Mary Jane leaned back slightly, allowing a controlled exhale. She felt the quiet satisfaction of recognition without intrusion, awareness without dominance, and competence exercised with freedom. Prince Jesse returned to reviewing projections, his expression calm yet attentive. The room, once a stage for tension and proximity, had transformed into a space of shared authority, refined awareness, and mutual respect. By evening, the adjustment had solidified. Decisions were executed efficiently, professional boundaries maintained. And the subtle emotional current that had developed over the hotel stay and the subsequent week was now harmonized with equality. Awareness remained present, but it no longer carried the strain of imbalance or overbearing authority. Instead, it became a shared force, guiding focus, fostering clarity, and sustaining subtle connection. Mary Jane understood the significance of this equilibrium. Authority had been exercised, awareness had been acknowledged, and balance had been achieved. The professional dynamic was no longer defined by hierarchy alone, but by competence, trust, and deliberate shared responsibility. Every glance, every nod, every silent acknowledgement reinforced the subtle tension that had matured into equilibrium. Prince Jesse observed the room, his own presence controlled, aware, and attentive. Equality did not diminish tension, it refined it, elevated it, and made their interactions sharper, more deliberate, and more meaningful. The subtle romantic undertones remained, layered into professional awareness, but never intrusive. Both were fully conscious of discipline, boundaries, and the refined energy that now defined their shared work. By the end of the day, the equal ground had been established. Awareness had been harmonized with authority. Tension had been transformed into focus and respect. Both Mary Jane and Prince Jesse recognized the quiet truth. Equality did not dilute professionalism, it enhanced it. And in that balance, subtle acknowledgement of connection remained, controlled, deliberate, and unmistakably present. The office felt different that morning, calm, deliberate, and imbued with quiet confidence. Mary Jane arrived with her briefcase, posture straight, every movement precise. The shared awareness that had begun in the hotel suite matured through the week, and evolved through strategic separation and equalization now existed in full equilibrium. Prince Jesse was already at his desk, reviewing reports with characteristic focus. His presence was commanding but unobtrusive, a reflection of the balance they had achieved. The subtle energy between them had shifted from tension to measured recognition, an awareness that neither demanded attention nor disrupted professionalism. Mary Jane set down her materials, acknowledging him with a controlled nod. There was no hesitation, no lingering tension, only the clarity of shared understanding. Their professional roles were defined, balanced, and equally respected. Awareness existed as a quiet, controlled current, acknowledged, yet never intrusive. Today marked the beginning of the next phase, working together under new rules, where respect and balance guided interaction before any personal connection could develop. The subtle romantic undertones, which had been layered into every previous act, were no longer charged with uncertainty. They were restrained, deliberate, and harmonious with professional integrity. The morning's meeting proceeded smoothly. Mary Jane led with authority, delivering insights with clarity and confidence. Prince Jesse observed, contributing only where necessary, his focus supportive rather than directive. Every interaction was precise, efficient, and grounded in mutual respect. The energy that had once been tension-filled was now channeled into collaboration, strategy, and execution. During a brief pause, Mary Jane reviewed her notes quietly, glancing toward Prince Jesse. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that exchange, acknowledgement passed between them. Understanding, respect, and the quiet memory of the night, the morning, and the week that had reshaped their dynamic. It was not desire expressed, nor need declared. It was recognition that rules had changed, boundaries were clear, and awareness could exist without compromising professionalism. Prince Jesse returned her glance with subtle acknowledgement, then returned to his work. The unspoken rules were understood. Respect first, balance maintained, awareness acknowledged, connection controlled. Both had navigated proximity, emotional tension, authority, and strategic separation to reach this equilibrium. By mid-afternoon, the office hummed with productivity. The team followed directives seamlessly, unaware of the quiet evolution between their two leaders. Mary Jane executed her tasks with precision, anticipating challenges and providing solutions. Prince Jesse monitored progress without interference, allowing her full autonomy while remaining available for consultation. The equal ground they had established ensured clarity, efficiency, and mutual confidence. As the day drew toward evening, Mary Jane paused, taking a moment to reflect on the journey. The hotel suite had tested boundaries and proximity. The night of reckoning had revealed emotional honesty. The strategic separation had refined focus, and the equalization of authority had solidified balance. Now in this calm, structured environment, the new rules were clear. Respect, professionalism, awareness, and mutual recognition formed the foundation of any potential connection. Prince Jesse observed her subtle reflection of composure and competence. He recognized the quiet strength in her adaptability, intelligence, and restraint. In this framework, any personal interest that had quietly existed was now aligned with respect, clarity, and balance. There would be no impulsive gestures, no blurred boundaries, only deliberate acknowledgement, measured interaction, and mutual integrity. Mary Jane closed her laptop, feeling a sense of accomplishment and clarity. She understood that the progression of events, from forced proximity to psychological awareness, authority testing, and strategic separation, had been a masterclass in balance, discipline, and controlled emotional honesty. The new rules were simple yet profound: boundaries respected, authority shared, awareness acknowledged, and any potential connection would emerge only after balance was restored. Prince Jesse glanced at her once, a subtle nod of acknowledgement passing silently between them. The shift in dynamic was complete. Awareness remained, quiet but undeniable. Tension had evolved into controlled acknowledgement, refined by respect and equality. They were no longer two individuals navigating proximity and authority. They were two professionals fully aware of each other's competence, presence, and unspoken recognition. The day ended with the subtle satisfaction of equilibrium achieved. Mary Jane gathered her materials, briefcase in hand, while Prince Jesse continued reviewing reports. Their interactions were professional, deliberate, and infused with a quiet, respectful awareness. The new rules ensured that any personal connection would arise only after balance, discipline, and mutual recognition had been fully established. As Mary Jane left the office, she felt the clarity that had been absent at the start of their shared week. The hotel suite, the night of reckoning, the strategic separation, and the equal ground had led to this: a professional dynamic that allowed awareness and subtle personal connection to exist without disruption. The rules were set, boundaries were respected, and both individuals understood that respect, balance, and integrity formed the foundation of all interactions moving forward. In the quiet of the office, Prince Jesse exhaled, a subtle acknowledgement of the journey they had traversed. The tension had not disappeared, it had matured. Awareness had not vanished, it had refined. The new rules governed every interaction: respect first, professionalism intact, boundaries maintained, and connection allowed only after equilibrium had been fully achieved. And with that understanding, both Mary Jane and Prince Jesse continued, side by side yet independent, aware yet disciplined, prepared for the future with clarity, respect, and the subtle promise of what might come, only after balance had been earned.